Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much for joining us this morning. Welcome to the series. Today you've joined us on the Level 3 Business Administrator Assessment Plan changes. So today we'll be looking at Assessment Plan number 3. Before we go into that, I'd like to introduce my colleagues today who's going to support. My name is Dominic Green. I'm the Technical Advisor for Business Skills at the City and Guilds. Joining me is Mandy Slaney, Lead Industry Manager for Business Skills.
Good morning.
And we've got Giusy Politano, who is one of our Development Managers at City and Guilds.
Good morning, and thank you for joining. I'm one of the Development Managers looking after the business skills areas for endpoint assessment.
And finally, Louise Warren, one of our Lead Independent Endpoint Assessors, is also joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us, everybody, today. I'm looking forward to spending some time going through some areas of the standard and some findings from our sampling, as well as letting you know about some changes to how we're going to work from a practical perspective. Thank you, Dom.
Thanks, Louise. So now that you've seen our faces, we'll save the bandwidth and we'll turn our cameras off. Okay, so as we briefly mentioned previously, this is a second in the series of webinars for the new Business Administration Assessment Plan. What we're going to do today is we're going to do a very brief recap, but not spend any time on it really, looking at the new assessment plan, because that's what the first webinar was about. We're going to look at some of the actions that are required. We're then going to look at the actual content of the new assessment plan 03, which Giusy is going to look at. Giusy is then going to pass over to Louise, the lead independent endpoint assessor, who's going to give us some really valuable insights into the current assessment plan and how it may help moving forward, before briefly looking at documentation and resources, before giving you an opportunity then to ask questions throughout. Now, you don't need to wait till the very end to ask questions. On the right-hand side of your screen, there should be a pane that allows you to enter questions as we go. We encourage this, so please do enter your questions here. What we will do is we'll spend some time at the very end looking at those questions, and if we don't get to answer your questions, fear not, we will do a frequently asked questions document, and we will place that up on our website along with this recording. So please note, this is being recorded. You will get a copy of this recording within 24 to 48 hours. It will be an automated email that's sent to you with a copy of the recording. It will also be up on the website. But just to say that within the email that you will get as a follow-up, there is a very short survey which will take you no longer than a minute, just asking you around some quick details around Assessment Plan 03 and some brief feedback on how we can improve. So without further ado, quick recap then on the changes. And as we previously mentioned in the January's webinar, the newest assessment plan is now called AP03. You can always check what version that you're using or working from, as up in the right-hand corner of the assessment plan, it does state the code. Okay, so it's basically known as ST0070AP03. It impacts learners who started their apprenticeship, so have an ILR start date from and including the 10th of September 2020. Now, we will mention this a few times because we really need to stress this point clearly. So learners with an ILR start date from the 10th of September 2020 will need to be studying on the AP03 apprenticeship. Anybody else with an ILR start date pre-10th of September 2020 will still be on the current assessment plan, not the new one. Now, if you are registering learners with an ILR start date of 10th September onwards, you will need to register them on the 947322, which is now open for registrations. In the previous webinar in January, it wasn't open, but it is now. So please ensure that your learners are registered on the correct assessment plan. We also mentioned that we will be readdressing the EPA packs, and these will be available for 947322 from the 3rd of May. This is currently on target. and so should be available on this date. Once they are available, they will be uploaded to our City and Guilds website. We are obviously now open for taking registrations as well on the 947322, so please do register any learners with an ILR start date of 10th September onwards as soon as possible on this standard. Okay, so as per previous webinar, to highlight briefly, the standard or the KSBs within the new standard have not changed. They are identical to the last standard that you are currently using. So in turn, this shouldn't impact your on-program delivery. Once again, it only impacts 10th of September learners onwards with regards to the new changes which Louise and Susie will mention. Now, we are open for registrations, so please do ensure that you register as soon as possible on the new assessment plan. What we will do is all registrations made up until the 24th of March 2021, which was yesterday, which should be on the new assessment plan. If they have an ILR start date of the 10th of September, we are in the process of transferring these over manually. So we have run a report and we've seen everybody who had a start date of the 10th of September onwards, we have manually transferred or in the process of manually transferring those onto the correct 947322. So we at City and Guilds are in the process of doing that. If, however, you've registered in error on 947322 and actually your learner had a start date of pre-10th of September, it would be up to the centre to refer to the EPA Pro manual from page 23, I think it covers 24 and 25, you would need to conduct a change of circumstance to put them on the correct assessment plan. So please bear that in mind. It might be that you need to inform the relevant exams people, exams office, etc. in order to check that out. But it would be the centre's responsibility to check that the learner is on the correct assessment plan. Okay, we know that there's three components, there's three assessment methods. These are the online multiple choice test, the project-based presentation, and the portfolio-based interview. And in the previous webinar, we did go into a little bit more detail about what is expected to be covered during these three assessment methods. We're not going to look at that today. If you do need to refresh yourself on the three assessment areas and the components and what KSPs are in these assessment methods, please do look at the link there below and refresh yourself with the previous webinar. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass over to Industry Manager Mandy Slaney, who's going to give you a brief overview of centre action that's required.
Thanks, Dom. As Dom alluded to previously, you check the dates and the dates that if you've registered any learners that they are on the right program version, because we have identified that there's quite a significant volume of learners that have been registered on the new version 3, which is a 947322, who had a start date of before the 10th of September. Now these will need to be cancelled and you will need to register them on the previous version, which is the 947312. So really, we put this slide together as an action. We need you to check all your registrations and make sure the learners are on the right programs. I have put details in the slide around for your exams teams really to help, and that is really, as Dom mentioned previously, it is they need to go to the EPA Pro user manual, pages 23 and 24, and there's detailed guidance around what you need to do, and they need to look at the start a new program. In addition to this, because this will generate a registration, you'll need to cancel the old one off. So you will need to contact customer support, you know, to arrange for one to be refunded, so you're not charged twice. We have put the details on of the inbox, but also just to make you aware, we do have a new telephone number for customer support, which is 01924 930 800. Okay, and I'm going to pass over to Susie.
Thank you, Mandy. Okay, so now I would like to tell you in a bit more details how the new assessment plan has impacted the endpoint assessment, specifically in terms of weighting and grading. So we do have the 3 components, and we can see that with the new assessment plan, they now each will carry equal weighting towards the contribution of the final grade. So they all carry 33.3% weighting, which is different from the past, from a previous assessment plan, where they had different contribution in terms of overall grading. Okay, so if we can have a look at the grading in particular. In terms of the knowledge test, good news, the knowledge test has not changed. We still have 50 questions, and in order to achieve a pass, the apprentices will need to have 30 correct multiple choice answers. And in order to get a distinction in the test, they will need to have 40 correct multiple choice answers. So no change to the knowledge test. The changes actually have had an effect in terms of grading, particularly for the other 2 components, the portfolio-based interview and the project improvement presentation. So with this new assessment plan, now in order to achieve a pass, apprentices must achieve all the passes criteria within each assessment method. And in order to achieve a distinction, apprentices must achieve all the passes and distinction criteria in each assessment method. So if we can have a look at the next slide, just to give you a visual in terms of the overall grading, you can see that in every component, the apprentices will need to have a pass in each assessment method in order to achieve an overall grade of a pass. And in order to achieve a distinction, they need a distinction in each of the assessment methods to achieve an overall grading of distinction. Okay, if we can have a look at the next slide, you might be familiar with what you see on the page here is taken from the assessment plan. It is the document that is available in both assessment plan in the annex, which has got all the KSBs, the modules, with what they mean, how, in which method they will be assessed, and then the fail, pass and distinction criteria. Now I want to have a look at how the terminology has slightly changed in terms of coverage among the different assessment methods. So in the previous version, when the competencies, the KSB was assessed within 2 assessment methods, there was a slash. Now it has changed and there is or, and sometimes there is and when it's more than 2 assessment methods. The reason why it has changed is because the way it was laid out before has caused confusion, and many have interpreted as it could be either one or the other, where actually the intention was for both assessment methods to be covered when there was a slash. So now you will see or, the combination are exactly the same. The difference is there is no slash, there is or, and then we got and as well, when it's also demonstrated, for instance, in the knowledge test. So just the language has changed to kind of avoid the confusion that was in the past. Okay, so if we now look at still some modules, some only map to one single assessment method, and when that is the case, they have it alone. So that is an example, for instance, for professionalism. As you can see, portfolio-based interview only mapped into either or is approximately 50% of the KSB that are linked to either assessment method should be achieved in each. And it's an approximation, is not 50%, sometimes it could be slightly less, but we are trying to achieve this split. For instance, as you can see from the value of their skills, we got 2 passes and then we got 3 distinctions. So you can see that the first pass, P1, is assessed within the project presentation, the second pass within the portfolio-based interview. Then we got the first two distinctions, which are assessed within the project presentation, and the last distinction, D3, with the portfolio-based interview. So you can see we got 2 criteria in the portfolio-based interview and 3 within the project presentation. That's why I said approximately 50%. What you need to bear in mind then is for your apprentices is after the project improvement presentation, if there are any areas that need a bit more clarifications and there are gaps, what it could well happen is that during the portfolio interview, apprentices may be asked questions about their project during the portfolio-based interview. So this is something to bear in mind. Okay, so if we look at the next slide, what I have prepared is a document which is called Mapping of Assessment Method Criteria Coverage. I could only, for the purpose of today, show you a few modules, but there will be a full document that will be available to download as part of the documentation from the webinar today. And then it will also be available from the website, from the 947322 page shortly. And it will also be available as part of the customer pack, which will launch on the 3rd of May. So I've tried to make it as simple as possible and visually helpful. So I used different colors. For instance, let's start from IT. We can see that we got 2 passes and then we got 2 distinctions, and they've been called pass 1, pass 2, distinction 1 and distinction 2. When you see the white background, what it means is that those particular passes or distinction, in this case, these 2 passes will be covered through the portfolio-based interview as well as the project presentation. So both P1 and P2 will be assessed in both methods. While, for instance, the 2 distinctions within the IT module, which are highlighted in green, will be assessed only as part of the portfolio-based interview. Then we have a look at the record and document production. You can see this is a full module with the 3 passes and 1 distinction, which is all in green, and what it means, it will be only assessed as part of the portfolio-based interview. Okay, if we can have a look at the next slide. Here we have the yellow and the pink or the peachy color. So this is project management, for instance. You can see that this is a module which is assessed in 2 different ways. We got, for instance, the first 2 passes, pass 1 and pass 2, which will be assessed as part of the project presentation. Then the third pass, pass 3, will be assessed within the knowledge test as well as the project presentation. So you will find other modules which will have the same color, which will mean exactly the same, assessed within knowledge test and project presentation. And then the last 3 distinctions, D1, D2, and D3, which will be assessed only in the project presentation. Okay, now we can have a look, for instance, at relevant regulation. You can see the pass 1 will be tested as part of the knowledge test and the portfolio-based interview, while the 2 other modules, the 2 other criteria, the 2 distinctions, D1 and D2, just in the portfolio-based interview. Then we got business fundamentals, for example, that is in orange. And what it means, when you see an orange color, it means it will be only tested in the knowledge test. So in this case, P1, pass 1 and distinction 1 will be assessed in the knowledge test. Okay, so if we can have a look at the next slide, please. You might be familiar with this slide, with this table, or at least I hope you are. It's the grading criteria table, which is available in the center pack. The only change I made is added the references. So for instance, you can see for interpersonal skills, the pass and distinction, column, I have added P1, P3, D3, so that the references match what you just seen in the previous slide. And the same with communication. We got P4, and then we got D1, D2, D3, which means, for instance, this is a screenshot from the portfolio. What it means, for instance, for communication is that the other passes will be assessed in the project presentation, for instance. So this will be available, obviously, in the customer pack. Okay, so now this is a list of all the modules and pass and distinction criteria that will be assessed in each modules, which are basically a more concise and shorter version of the colorful document that you will get at the end of this webinar, which is the mapping document. So you can see all the modules that have not changed in terms of the knowledge test, and all you need to remember is that in terms of all the passes, for instance, from the project management to go till external environmental factors, is all understanding and knowledge of relevant laws and regulation, stakeholder management principle, etc. And what they will need to, in terms of application in the other two assessment methods, apprentices will be required to put into practice their knowledge, putting into context with their role and their organization. And please remember that we do have the knowledge test guidance document, which is available on the website, which will show you all the details in terms of the depth and breadth of content to prepare your apprentices for the knowledge test. Okay, here is the list of modules, passes and distinction that will be tested as part of the portfolio-based interview. So I'm not going to read them all because you will get a copy of the documents anyway that will lay out all the modules. And then in the next slide, you have the project presentation with all the modules, all the passes and distinctions. There are some areas, obviously, if you remember when I said earlier on the white background, it means that the same modules will be tested, like for instance, IT, P1 and P2, that will be tested in both the presentation as well as the interview. So there are areas that do crossover. Yes, so this is just a list, just to help you to quickly go through them. Okay, so in terms of the question for the presentation, so you will need to make sure the project that was started on month 9 of the apprenticeship is submitted at Gateway. Once it's submitted at Gateway, the LIEPA will review the content of the project report and then decide which question to allocate to the apprentice based on the content seen in the project. So it will be a lot more focused question, probably, if we compare it to the past. I mean, you do have examples in the pack about the type of questions, for instance, how you have improved the process or operating practice, what were the steps that you took to implement the project, what worked well, and how would you improve the result in future. So it will be a similar question anyway, but a lot more specific to the project. Also, what I wanted to add in terms of the question is that it will be available 5 days from the time the Gateway has successfully passed, and then it will be your responsibility to prompt the apprentice with the allocated questions so that they can start to prepare their presentation with the questions as well as the rest of the content. So the document with the question will be available from EPA Pro. One last thing that I want to add about the question, so it will be based on the content, and it's likely as well that it will be based on areas within the project that appear to to be a bit weak and lacking content and details. And this is really to allow the apprentice to pick up the gaps at an earlier stage, so during the presentation, rather than leaving it till the end during the question and answer session, which we know is around 10 to 15 minutes, so it's a very short time. So this is really to support the apprentice in trying to give them the best opportunity to meet the criteria at an earlier stage. Okay, I think this was my last slide, so I'm gonna now pass you to my colleague Louise, who will give you lots of details about all the areas, all the modules, and how the apprentices are performing. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Juicy. So my name is Louise Warren, and I am one of the 3 leads for the business administration area. It's really nice to be able to speak to you all today and hopefully provide some clarity and reassurance in terms of the changes that the new standard will mean to you. Okay, so there's 2 key areas I'd like to talk to you about today. Firstly, I want to let you know about some practical changes that we are implementing to the recommended delivery for the EPA, which has been put in place to support apprentices in giving them the best possible opportunity for success. So we have changed the ordering of the EPA assessments, and I will go through that with you. Secondly, I will discuss trends that show the areas where a lot of apprentices miss out on marks. Because as you now know, the 60% for the pass and 80% for the distinction, which were all part of the existing standard for APO1, will now be gone. And the requirement is that all the pass criteria are met for a pass, and all of the pass and distinction criteria are met for a distinction. I'm sure this is an area of concern for a lot of people, but like many other standards with a 100% pass mark, it's important to have a good understanding of the criteria and where trends show apprentices may struggle and can be an area of focus. We have also identified some trends where learners are given fail grades, and I would like to also share these with you. So in terms of practicalities, currently the knowledge test is whenever possible completed first, and this will remain the same. So with version 1 of the standard, we normally conduct the portfolio-based interview next, followed by the project improvement presentation and question and answer session. At the moment, both of these assessments are marked entirely separately, and whenever an apprentice tells us in the portfolio-based interview, whatever an apprentice tells us in the interview can't be used in the marking of the project presentation, and vice versa. Okay, next slide, Dom. So practical changes to the way we are assessing in the new process. Here you can see the amended EPA process and how this will usually look. So the knowledge test will be conducted first, as if within the original version of the standard. So we've now changed the recommended order of assessments, so the project presentation is next, followed by a 30-minute break and then the interview. Now this is quite a big change for everyone, and I'm sure you'll be questioning why we would want to do this. The short answer is that this is likely to be in the best interest of the apprentice. So one of the positives of the new standard is that it now allows for some, albeit limited, holistic marking across both areas of the EPA event. So therefore it makes logical sense for the presentation to be delivered first, as we can mark information given to us and then ask questions, rather than ask questions for which the answer may have been given in the presentation. So the upshot here is the project and the interview are still separate assessments, and it's really important to be clear on that. They're not combined in any way, but we are fortunate now with the changes that we can use some limited evidence to cross-reference and mark from one area into another. So you will notice that the break time has increased, and this is to allow apprentices suitable time for a comfort break and to prepare for their interview, as well as giving the LIEPA time to repair and amend any questions following what they've heard in the presentation, and look at what areas can be personalised to support the apprentice most effectively. Okay, so let's look at some trends and areas where marks are not often awarded on the current standard, and this should help you identify potential areas for training and revision. So here are the key areas for the portfolio interview. And as LIEPAs, we see certain trends where marks are not often awarded, as apprentices are not able to provide suitable responses or real-life examples. So now, with the new version of the standard, all areas must be met to achieve pass or distinction, and apprentices will need to be given the opportunity to cover every area. And it's important that apprentices, employers and training providers understand this important change. So, for example, in planning and organisation, many apprentices tell us they don't organise meetings or do logistics. This would mean that they would fail as they have not covered all the areas. So I will give you some ideas to support you in ensuring the evidence is there for all areas and hopefully avoid unnecessary fail grades. Okay, so I'll look briefly at each of the KSB areas and where apprentices tend to struggle to gain all of the marking criteria. Okay, so let's look at IT first. The vast majority of apprentices perform very well in the IT KSB area. If we look briefly at the criteria, the pass criteria here ask an apprentice to demonstrate if they can use IT packages to write letters or emails, or to record and analyse information. Most apprentices are great at IT and their portfolios are brimming with IT examples. It is often the analysis part where apprentices can lose marks, so it's important to show evidence of this, perhaps referring to spreadsheet analysis or the use of Gantt charts. Okay, so if we look next at record and document production, this is another area where trends show that apprentices perform really well. Supporting others in producing documentation is important here, even at pass level, and real-life examples are expected to be discussed and evidenced in the portfolio. Both pass and distinction criteria here require the apprentice to make recommendations for improvements to records or documents. So it's important this is covered in the breadth and depth, and the breadth and depth of the response will dictate if pass or distinction marks can be awarded. For distinction level students, the distinction criteria on the bottom line is often a grading criteria which is not awarded. So here we are looking at apprentices giving examples of not only coaching others, but doing this to a good standard and explaining how they've had positive feedback on their coaching skills. Now, this could be from a manager or the person being coached. Okay, so moving on to interpersonal skills. This is an area in which, again, apprentices perform well, but many apprentices do not achieve all of the criteria, neither the pass or distinction sections. Most of the criteria here are self-explanatory. However, some apprentices misinterpret the word challenging, and this can affect the criteria that are awarded. So often we ask apprentices about how they have dealt with a challenging situation, and they will tell us that they don't fall out with their colleagues or their manager and they all get along very nicely. This doesn't help in the attainment of marks. What we are looking for here is that the apprentice challenges others. So, for example, they have a great idea for a change to improve a process in the workplace and how they influence others to their way of thinking and how they did that. So they might have held a meeting and showed evidence of how this would help the organisation, and then perhaps produced a Gantt chart to show that a deadline could not be met, and then challenged the manager by asking for an extension to the deadline. There's lots of examples I could go through if I had more time, but examples like this are great because they can be marked by the LIEPA holistically, meaning marks in other areas can be awarded for the same example. So the Gantt chart maps to IT, for example. So in terms of the final distinction mark, please note the use of the word proactive in the use of coaching others. As a side note on that point, and a time-saving tip for apprentices, when an apprentice gives us an example, like the one I've just discussed, there's little to be gained from using the same example again in later questioning within the same assessment. If the LIEPA has heard it, they will mark it, and they are clearly looking for more examples or a different example. Okay, so let's look at communications then now. In communications, most apprentices perform well. However, marks can be easily missed in terms of answering queries from inside and outside of the organisational department. So this means answering external queries. So giving the apprentice responsibility for answering phone queries, for example, could support here. And in terms of the final distinction criteria, it's important to understand the term championing, which is about encouraging others to use innovative communication methods such as social media or Zoom, or thinking outside the box to get messages across. Some apprentices worry that written communication means writing with a pen and paper or sending formal letters. I want to clarify that emails can be used as a written form of communication. Okay, so moving on to quality. One key area within the quality section is about identifying areas for improvement and justifying why improvements are needed. The improvement needs to be quality related, and for distinction, it needs to have been implemented. Again, coaching is not just completed for the distinction, but it needs to be proactive. So the apprentice needs to be the one instigating the coaching, not just reacting to what they've been told to do. Looking at planning and organisation, this is certainly one of the areas where often full marks are not obtained by apprentices. Pitfall areas appear to be within the management of meetings, where apprentices sometimes tell the LIEPA they do not manage meetings. Within the new standard, as you now know, all areas must be covered. This means that an apprentice who does not manage any meetings simply will not pass. An apprentice is not expected to necessarily run a board meeting at level 3. However, they could be planning and running meetings to discuss their project, meet with their assessor, or organise team events. This is certainly one area where apprentices fall down, so it's essential that apprentices are given every opportunity within the workplace to manage some meetings. Similarly, some apprentices tell their assessor that they simply don't do logistics. Again, if they don't do any logistics whatsoever, they will not pass. It's as simple as that. But it's important to look at what logistics means and make sure apprentices are given every opportunity. The definition of logistics refers to the process of managing how resources are acquired, stored and transported to their final destination. So we can consider examples such as arranging travel, accommodation, stock control and planning events. At distinction level, of course, we are looking for responses with more breadth and depth. And again, the word proactive is key. Okay, so let's move on now to the organisation. This is relatively self-explanatory, but apprentices do need to be prepared, and perhaps a PESTLE or SWOT analysis would help. The apprentice should know the organisation's vision, aims, and how it works. They should know the sector and how the organisation has been impacted by political factors. And again, we're not looking for generalised or theoretical responses during the EPA event, but application to their own organisation. Looking at value of their skills, the inclusion within the portfolio of a simple organisational chart, which is of course personalised to the organisation, the apprentice, would help in the preparation for the EPA event. It is important for apprentices not just to talk theoretically in interview, but to contextualise evidence and make it personalised to themselves and their job role. Okay, let's look at stakeholders. In terms of stakeholders, the majority of apprentices meet all of the past criteria. Not many apprentices receive all of the distinction criteria marks. The first distinction mark, an apprentice should have a practical understanding of why stakeholders are managed as they are, and certainly an understanding of the power interest stakeholder mapping grid would support in their learning for this area. But we are not looking for a theoretical response, but rather practical application and understanding. For the second distinction criteria, we were looking at how apprentices go above and beyond when developing relationships. So, for example, this is not really making a cup of tea for a visitor, as this is expected in most jobs. We're looking at doing more than is expected in a day-to-day role. After all, this is a level 3 qualification, and the distinction criteria asks for going beyond expectations. Looking at relevant regulations, apprentices need to know at least 2 relevant laws and regulations and to be able to discuss how each is followed by them. To reach distinction, the word championing is referred to, which will perhaps involve encouraging others to follow these laws or regulations. Now, this is one of the key areas where some apprentices fail their EPA. If an apprentice cannot show they have knowledge of laws and regulations and that these are followed by them, they will fail their EPA, and many do on the current version of the standard. This is certainly an area that could form part of EPA revision. And please remember, apprentices are permitted to take their portfolio into their interview. Looking at policies, again, at least 2 organisational policies must be covered to achieve a pass. For the distinction, promoting policies could be encouraging others, conducting training, or posting information on the intranet. External factors. At least 2 external factors affecting the organisation must be discussed. Some apprentices struggle to relate these to their own job role. So the factors they discuss must be relatable to the apprentice's own job. An apprentice might talk, for example, about how exchange rate affect the cost of goods a company buys. But if this has no direct effect on their job role, then the second pass would not be met. So it's advisable to consider which factors the apprentice is going to cover in their portfolio and how this links from a practical perspective. At distinction level, we are looking at what research the apprentice has done to gather more information and expect to see responses at a suitable breadth and depth for a distinction at level 3. Okay, so let's look at professionalism then now. There are lots of areas within professionalism, and it's worth what you might consider to be stating the obvious in terms of dress code. Being on time for work, for example, as these are key areas that need to be covered. At distinction level, key areas would be about showing respect even in difficult circumstances, as well as looking at the term irrespective of background. And remember, examples from the portfolio should be used as evidence. Okay, so moving on to personal qualities. Consistency is key in this area, and many marks can be awarded holistically here. But sometimes apprentices are asked direct questions and struggle to come up with examples of when, for example, they have shown integrity. At distinction level, we are looking for the apprentice to discuss how they've encouraged others to show more positive personal qualities. And this could be through behaviour mentoring, showing certain leadership skills, or correcting others when they're not showing these qualities and guiding them in the right direction. Okay, managing performance. One area within managing performance to be noted is about asking for feedback, which is different to just being given feedback. The apprentice needs to actively seek feedback and then take this on board with examples of how this has been done. And again, at distinction level, we're looking for more breadth and depth in the responses. Adaptability. Adapting to change positively is achieved by most apprentices at pass level. At distinction level, evaluation of the change is often not detailed enough. A simple "it went well" is not an evaluation, and this needs to be covered in sufficient breadth and depth for it and to be properly thought through. Okay, responsibility. For the pass, please note that the apprentice must demonstrate examples of showing initiative when developing their own skills and behaviours. This again is really looking at them being proactive. For distinction marks to be awarded, we are looking again at the apprentice going above and beyond expectations, as well as proactively learning and then passing this on to others, so them being a real role model. Okay, so in summary, please cover all of the areas in the portfolio. This is more important now than ever, and please read all of the keywords in each criteria section. Our assessment team would rather the portfolio was merged into one document if possible. You can include screenshots of evidence and merge documents. A one document portfolio not only saves time for the IEPAs, but it can be in the best interest of the apprentice, as the information being all in one place means the assessors are not likely to miss anything important. If the apprentice has one clearly referenced document to bring into the interview, which is easy to navigate, they can quickly find information that they need on the day. This is a timed assessment, so an apprentice struggling to find information while searching through pages and pages of information could be wasting valuable time. It's really important to practice the interview. 45 minutes can go really quickly, and some apprentices fail or attain a lower grade than they would like simply because they have gone off topic and lost valuable time. Okay, so if we look at fail grades then, I'm sure nobody wants to see a fail grade, and there are some clear trends with why apprentices fail, and I will just spend a moment to let you know about these. Of the KSB areas, 3 in particular stand out as fundamental areas requiring apprentice support, and certainly areas worth revising prior to the EPA. We have identified that apprentices on the whole fail because of either low marks overall, or that they cannot provide suitable responses to cover these 3 areas. Apprentices must be able to talk about at least 2 relevant laws or regulations, and talk about how these regulations affect their own job role within the organisation. The KSB area is called relevant regulations, not irrelevant regulations, and therefore they must be relevant to the apprentice's job. So, for example, an apprentice might work in an office of a hospital, and they might talk about how COVID regulations mean nurses must wear PPE. This may not be obviously relevant to their own role as an administrator, so it needs to be linked. Say, for example, they have to wear PPE as well, or analyse how PPE is used and keep a log of it on a database, or order in more PPE. It's not enough to just talk about regulations affecting others in the organisation. Every response needs to be in the context of the apprentice and their own job role. The apprentice must give at least 2 examples for each of these areas. So 2 laws or regulations, 2 external factors affecting the organisation and their own job role, and 2 policies. If an apprentice fails their portfolio-based interview on the current version of the standard, the chances are that it's because they were unclear in these areas and unable to contextualise answers and make them relate to their own job role. And the new assessment plan will be no different in these areas. Okay, so if we move on to the project improvement presentation, we're going to look at some key areas now, and this should help you identify potential areas for training and revision. So we have suggested that the project will now be delivered before the interview in order to support apprentices working to the new version of the standard. The presentation focuses on the skills required to complete a project or process improvement. These are planning and organisation, project management, demonstrating quality standards, and decision making in prioritising areas of focus. The delivery of the presentation, as well as getting the timing right, is also important. As so many areas overlap with the interview, I'll not go through every KSB area required for the project, but instead I have identified 3 areas to support you. Okay, so firstly, project management. Now, obviously, this is a key KSB area for this assessment and needs to be well considered when formulating the project. Planning is key to any project. Consider including planning tools such as Gantt charts, spreadsheets, graphs. All of these help to paint a picture of how the project was put together. Project management tools must be used and demonstrated at both pass and distinction level. This is tools plural, so more than one. At pass level, the project could be relatively simple. Distinction level students must cover a significant project. For distinction students, strong leadership skills need to be evidenced, as well as other areas, including a strong grasp of project management tools. Again, more than one needs to be included. Okay, so now let's look at decision making. It's important that apprentices talk in detail and give examples of how they have reached the key decisions in the project and its planning. Even at pass level, a range of information needs to be considered. Challenging others can refer to how they have put forward ideas and overcome objections. It's important to note that at distinction level, apprentices must consider the risks of the decisions they make, and often this is an area that apprentices miss. Okay, processes. Following processes and procedures are crucial aspects of the project management and planning. These should be clearly evidenced in the project. At pass level, an apprentice should talk about what organisational processes have been followed and why. The project should be implemented whenever possible. If an apprentice has, for example, completed a project looking at new IT systems, completed all the work, researched and produced work to demonstrate why one system is better than another, but then the organisation could not afford to implement it, this could still be a successful project, as it is essentially finished and the project was most likely useful to the organisation. We see projects of various quality, depth and breadth. Some are extremely interesting with well-delivered presentations which link effectively to the KSB areas required for the standard. Sadly, they are not all like that, and some projects are very basic, which will not have enough breadth and depth to meet the criteria. Some apprentices talk about group projects. This is fine, but we can only mark the apprentice's personal contribution. And if this is unclear, it can be difficult for the LIEPA to establish this, and so some areas cannot be awarded. Some apprentices talk in terms of we did this or we did that. How are we to know what they did personally? Again, this can waste valuable time, as we might have to clarify this or simply cannot award the grading criteria. Occasionally, it can be hard to tell what the project was actually about, and the LIEPA then needs to spend time in the question and answer session establishing the very basics, and this can mean more detailed questions can't be asked due to time constraints. Some apprentices deliver presentations that are not linked to the KSBs, or they show us the outcome of a project, such as going through a handbook they've made. Whilst it's fine to have a project on the creation of a handbook, we want to know how the project was conducted rather than listening to extracts from the actual handbook. The best projects will show us the outcome of the project, but it's clearly linked to the KSBs for the standard. Okay, so that draws a conclusion to the areas I wanted to cover with you today. I hope it's been helpful to go through just some of the areas where apprentices struggle or don't miss the grading criteria. This is a change for everyone involved, and I personally see it as a positive, that all marks can now be hit, which aligns us with other standards, and I know that apprentices are achieving positive outcomes in these. Thanks for your time today, and I will be available to answer any questions depending on how much time we have. And I'll just hand you back to Don.
Many thanks, Louise. Much appreciated. A really good insight there from our lead independent endpoint assessor, one of. So hopefully that will support you in the transition, the change to the new APO3 assessment plan. Just to let you know, the new EPA assessment pack and recording forms will be available from May 2021. Please remember that actually between now and May, the KSBs haven't changed, so it's not detrimental to the learner in any way. And just referring back to what Juicy said before about the knowledge test support, we do have a handbook. It's called the Knowledge Test Guidance. It's often overlooked, but it is on our website. So please do look at that in detail to ensure that you're getting the best out of the knowledge test for your learners. A brief look at the other resources. The Knowledge Test Guidance screenshot there, the bottom left that I've just mentioned. We also have an annual report from the LEAD IEPAs. So please do look at the LEAD Independent Endpoint Assessors report. This is stored currently under the EPA Preparation tab on Smart Screen, which you get access to once you register a learner, and it's also uploaded onto EPA Pro. So anybody with access to EPA Pro also will be able to find the LIEPA reports for all standards on EPA Pro. So whilst we're on EPA Pro, just to reiterate then, this screenshot here on the left-hand side under support materials is where you will find the documentation. So when the new EPA packs come out in May, these will be uploaded to EPA Pro. So you can see on the left there, you have the preparation resources, EPA packs, the recording form for centres, the sample test for knowledge, which we are also working on producing a new one, which should be released in the May time as well. The LIEPA reports, exemplar materials that you would normally go onto Smart Screen for, as well as the handbook itself. Okay, we just want to reiterate as well, we have had a change in telephone number for centre support. This should now be cheaper for you to access, as it is a local number, 01924, rather than an expensive call number. So please bear that in mind if you can't get through using email centresupport@cityandguilds.com. The Business Skills webpage is dedicated to the business portfolios, including Business Administrator. Please do have a look at that link there. This is where we will upload the recorded webinars to across the board, not just this one, but customer service, etc. So please do take a look at that. It has all the pre-recorded webinars. So if you need to refresh yourself on webinar 1, which was done in January, this is where that's stored. If you need any technical advice, please feel free to email me personally, dominic.green@cityandguilds.com. And of course, if you haven't heard about this webinar directly through your email inbox, please do register for updates there on our website. It might be that you have registered for updates already, but actually you need to update your preferences to cover business admin or customer service, etc. If you're unsure, it's well worthwhile logging on there and just checking about your preferences. Okay, we have taken an awful lot of time up, but there is time for a couple of questions. We have had lots and lots. We will answer every single one in the form of a frequently asked questions document. And in fact, we will be doing a third webinar as well, by which time hopefully the EPA packs will be up and running. And if we see any trends from these questions, then we can really drill down and focus on these specific areas. So I did say that there's lots and lots of questions. I can see a general trend around the project itself. So there are a few questions about the change around in the project, and I hope that's been answered by Louise. So the project will be assessed first, like Louise mentioned, to try and holistically map across. Another question from Jan is, if the project is uploaded at Gateway, once they've answered the question, can we upload a new copy of the project? Jan, currently I don't think that would be allowed. We will get clarification on that, but basically we are looking at the project in relation to generating a question. Now, once you go through Gateway, you are saying there that all the evidence is ready to be submitted. So there is another question also saying, Currently, the project is not submitted at Gateway. This will now be a big change. It will indeed be a change, but the whole point of Gateway is to say that the learning has been completed and that the evidence is ready. And so the project report is now submitted at Gateway in order to generate that question. We are now at 2 minutes past 11, and we appreciate that we have received lots and lots of questions. We apologise for the time issue, but what we will do is, between Louise, Mandy, Juicy and myself, we will document all questions, draw down the report, answer them accordingly, and put them up on the website under that link that I mentioned before. So please continue to type in your questions if you do have any further ones. Would just like to say thank you very much again for joining us this morning, and please do look out for the third in the series of the Business Administrator webinars, which will be at a date to be confirmed, but in the not too distant future. Once again, from myself and all my colleagues, thank you very much for joining this morning, and have a lovely day.